Usually when we dive into a topic here, we're trying to clarify something. We take a messy subject, maybe it's a new tech trend, a piece of legislation, or, a historical event, and we try to clean it up.
That's the goal.
We scrub off the grime, organize the facts, and sort of give you the takeaways.
Right. That is the job description. Clarity is king.
But today feels different. Because the source material you've brought to the table, it doesn't just clarify history. It feels like it's trying to delete it and rewrite it from the ground up.
It is definitely a demolition job.
Yeah.
But the argument is that you have to demolish the unstable structure before you can even see the foundation underneath.
And the structure we're talking about is, well, it's massive. We are looking at the traditional biographies of the Prophet Muhammad, the history of the Quran, and the very, very geography of the Middle East.
Specifically, we are looking at the work of a Dr. Khaled Waleed. He has a YouTube channel. It's called Almighty Covenant Ulashes.
Yeah.
And his central thesis is, to put it mildly, a paradigm shift.
Paradigm shift is being very polite. He's basically arguing that for, 1,400 years, millions, maybe billions of people have been reading a manual for intellectual liberation and mistaking it for a soap opera.
Well, that's a very blunt way to put it, but yes, that is the core metaphor he uses. He talks about a magic spell.
The magical mixture.
Right, the magical mixture. He argues that traditional interpretations, specifically what are known in the field as Israelites, have acted like a fog, like a magical spell that obscures the real meaning.
Okay, let's pause on that term Israelites, because we're going to be hearing that a lot today, I think.
Right.
What exactly does Dr. Waleed mean by that in this specific context?
Sure. So in classical Islamic scholarship, Israelites refers to narratives or traditions that were imported from previous scriptures. So mostly Jewish or Christian folklore, things from the Talmud or apocryphal gospels that were used to, to fill in the gaps of the Quranic stories.
So the Quran gives a brief outline of, say, the story of Moses, and people went, oh, I know this story from the Bible, and just sort of pasted in the details.
Exactly. And Dr. Waleed's argument is that these imported stories didn't just fill gaps, they completely corrupted the lens. They hijacked the narrative. They turned abstract intellectual codes into, physical human dramas.
They turned a book about how to think into a book about who married whom in the 7th century desert.
That's it. Precisely. And that's the real hook for our deep dive today. We are going to try to strip away that biography lens. We're going to look at a specific chapter of the Quran, Surah Al-Ahzab, the Confederates, which is usually ground zero for all the domestic controversy in Islamic history.
It is. It's the chapter that supposedly deals with the Prophet's marriage to a woman named Zainab, the status of his adopted son Zaid, and all these rules for his wives. It's very personal.
Or so we think.
Or so we have been told.
Dr. Waleed essentially says, stop. Put your linguistic glasses on, because if you read the Arabic roots, the actual words on the page, without all that historical baggage, those people, they might not be people at all.
Okay, stop right there. You're telling me that we are going to talk about a history where the main characters might not even exist as, flesh and blood human beings.
Not in the way you think they do. He's not denying reality. He's denying the interpretation of the text. He is saying the text is an architecture of thought, not a diary.
All right. I'm skeptical, I have to admit, but I'm listening. Where do we even begin to unpack something this dense?
We start with the biggest domino, the first piece that, if you knock it over, everything else starts to fall.
And that would be the figure of Zaid.
Zaid. Now, for listeners who aren't, steeped in this history, the standard narrative, the movie version that's in all our heads, is that Zaid was the Prophet's adopted son. He was a freed slave, very beloved, very close to the Prophet.
Correct.
And he had a wife named Zainab. There was some marital trouble. Zaid divorces her. And then, by a command from God, the Prophet Muhammad marries her. That's the story.
That is the accepted story, yes.
Yeah.
And historically, that story has been a major target for critics of the religion. They paint it as a scandal. Of course.
A story of, desire or confusing social taboos. The central question they pose is, why is the Prophet marrying his daughter-in-law, essentially?
It's messy. It feels very human. Maybe a little too human. Feels like something you'd read in a tabloid, not a sacred text.
And that is Dr. Waleed's first red flag. He looks at this entire narrative and says, stop. He argues that the Quran presents itself as a book of universal, timeless guidance. So why would the creator of the universe waste eternal verses on a domestic dispute in 7th century Arabia? It doesn't scale.
That is a fair question. If it's meant to be timeless for all people, for all of history, why get bogged down in gossip column details from one specific time and place?
Precisely. It breaks the internal logic of the book.
Right.
So Dr. Waleed posits that if we look at the structure of the Quran and the nature of the prophetic mission as a whole, this cannot possibly be a story about a domestic breakup. It has to be something else entirely.
So if it's not a soap opera, what is it? What's behind the curtain?
It's an intellectual revolution, a transfer of power. And Dr. Waleed starts with the name itself. The word is Zaid.
Which we all just assume is a guy's name, like John or David or Michael.
In English, sure. But in Quranic Arabic, he argues, names often carry the function of the thing they describe. They aren't just arbitrary labels. Dr. Waleed points out the three-letter root of the word Zaid, Z-Y-D. The verb is zada.
Which means, what does zeta mean?
It means to increase or to add. The name Yazid, for instance, literally means he increases. So, strictly speaking, the word Zaid isn't a label for one specific guy. It's a title. It's a descriptor. It means the one who increases, or more dynamically, the seeker of increase.
The seeker of increase. That sounds very abstract. Are you saying there was no guy walking around named Zaid?
Dr. Waleed is arguing that in the context of the revelation, Zaid represents a specific type of person, a profile. It's like a rank in the military. When you say the general, you aren't using a personal name. You're describing a function, a role.
Okay, so who fits the profile of the increaser? Because a general has an army to command. What does a seeker of increase have? What is he seeking to increase?
Knowledge. He has a lot of knowledge, but he wants more. And this is where the historical context he proposes gets really fascinating. Dr. Waleed suggests this figure, this Zaid, represents a high-ranking scholar from the children of Israel.
A Jewish scholar.
Yes, someone deeply, deeply learned in the Torah and the previous scriptures. A rabbi, a master of the law, someone who had mastered the old knowledge. But, and this is the absolute key, he wasn't satisfied. He knew the texts had been tampered with. He knew the methodology was stagnant, just repeating old arguments. He was seeking more. He was seeking an increase in truth.
Hence, Zaid, the seeker of increase.
Hence, Zaid. He is the archetype of the honest scholar, the one who isn't afraid to ask, is there more truth out there? Have we gotten something wrong?
Okay, I can follow that metaphor. It's like a brilliant scientist in the 1800s who realizes Newtonian physics isn't enough to explain everything, so he starts looking for what would become quantum mechanics. He is a seeker of increase.
That is a perfect analogy. It's an intellectual state of being. You can be a Zed, I can be a Zaid. Anyone who sincerely seeks to grow beyond their current understanding is a Zaid.
But the Quran is very explicit. It talks about Zayd's wife. It talks about a divorce. There's a famous line when Zayd had accomplished his desire from her. If Zayd is a scholarly archetype, then who is the wife? Please don't tell me the wife is also a concept.
This is the part that might break your brain a little bit, so brace yourself.
I'm ready. Bring it on.
Dr. Waleed introduces a concept he calls methodological engineering. He argues that the word azwaj, which we almost always translate as spouses or wives in this high-level architectural context of the Quran, refers to ideological pairing.
Ideological pairings. Okay, you have to explain that.
Think about how you relate to your worldview, or your profession, or your political party. We even use this language in English all the time. We say someone is wedded to an idea, or they're married to their job.
Sure. It means you're committed, you're bound to it, it defines you, you wake up with it, you go to sleep with it.
Exactly. Dr. Waleed argues that a scholar's primary spouse is their methodology. It's the school of thought they belong to. It's the institution that gives them their scientific or religious status. It's their paradigm.
So Zayd, our honest scholar, is married to the old traditional religious hierarchy of his time.
Yes, he is a master of the old books, the old laws. That is his wife. That is his intellectual soulmate. That is his comfort zone, his entire professional standing, his tenure. But remember, he is a Zayd. He is a seeker. And he starts to realize that his wife, his old methodology, is barren. It's no longer producing truth. It's no longer answering the deep questions. It's just full of Israeli myths, cultural baggage, and distortions. It cannot give him the spiritual or intellectual increase he is desperately looking for.
So the divorce.
The divorce is an intellectual break. It's a paradigm shift for him personally. It's the moment the scholar stands up in the faculty lounge and says, I cannot use this system anymore. It's flawed. It's sterile. I'm leaving it behind.
That gives a whole new meaning to that verse when Zayd had accomplished his desire from her.
A completely new meaning. It doesn't mean he got tired of a woman. The Arabic word is watara. It implies he exhausted the need. He extracted every last drop of benefit he could from that old way of thinking, realized it was insufficient, and moved on. He completed his purpose with it.
He outgrew his PhD program, he got everything he could out of it, and it was time to move on.
Essentially, yes, he graduated from the old school and realized it was time to enroll in the new school.
And this leads directly to the part that usually causes the most controversy. The prophet then marrying her. The Quran says, "We married her to you."
We married her to you. That's the divine command.
So if she is the old school of authority, the established religious position,
Then God is telling the prophet, you are now the heir to this seat of authority.
whoa, okay, let me process that. So Zaid, the top dog of the old religion, the chief scholar, vacates his intellectual and spiritual seat because he recognizes the truth is now elsewhere. And God tells Muhammad, take the seat.
It's a transfer of power, a transfer of legitimacy. Think about it strategically. If Zaid, the most respected scholar of the previous tradition, steps down and validates the prophet, he is essentially handing over the keys to the house of wisdom.
It validates the new mission in the eyes of everyone else.
It legitimizes it completely. It resolves the conflict of continuity. Islam, in this view, isn't destroying the old truth. It is inheriting the seat of authority that the honest scholars, the Zaids, willingly and logically vacated because they found something better.
That completely reframes the stakes of the entire chapter. We aren't watching a wedding in a tent somewhere, we're watching a coronation, an intellectual coronation.
A methodological coronation. The prophet becomes the executor of the divine legacy that stretches all the way back to Abraham and Moses.
But wait, this creates a huge problem for the traditional narrative, doesn't it? Because the whole point of that story, the reason it's even in the Quran according to tradition, is to break the adopted son taboo. People were supposedly whispering, you can't marry your adopted son's ex-wife. That's the whole drama.
And Dr. Waleed addresses this head-on. In fact, this is where the psychology of idea comes in. He expands the idea.
Idea, what does that mean?
It's the plural, the adopted ones, or, more accurately, the claimed ones.
If Zaid isn't a literal adopted son, what is an adopted son in this architecture of thought? What are the idea?
This is where the lesson shifts from history to psychology. Dr. Waleed argues that adoption in the Quran, specifically the term idea, is not about taking in orphans. It's about intellectual sponsorship.
Intellectual sponsorship, like a mentor.
More than a mentor, the root word comes from dawa, to call upon or to claim. The idea are the people or the entities you call upon to save you, to guide you, or to think for you, instead of God.
Oh, I see where this is going. This is about authority figures, clerics.
Exactly. It's the religious leaders, the sheikhs, the priests, the gurus, even revered ancestors whose opinions are followed blindly. When you look at one of these figures and you say, I am going to follow this person no matter what, I am their son, they are my spiritual father, you have, in this framework, committed an act of spiritual adoption.
You've outsourced your brain, your critical thinking.
You've outsourced your conscience. You've outsourced your direct connection to the divine. And Dr. Waleed points directly to verse 33.4, which is right there in the same section, just before Zaid is mentioned. It says, God has not made for any man two hearts in his hollow.
I've always loved that image. Two hearts in his hollow. But usually I hear it explained as something sentimental, like you can't love two people equally, or you can't be a hypocrite.
Dr. Waleed gets much sharper and more technical with it, he says. You cannot have two operating systems running your mind. You cannot run Tradition version 1.0 and Revelation version 2.0 at the same time on the same machine.
They'll conflict. The system will crash.
The system will crash. You cannot hold on to the adaya, the old masters, the fathers of tradition, and simultaneously claim to be following the new light of the Quran. You have to make a choice.
It reminds me of people who want to be deeply scientific, but also hold on to, superstitions that directly contradict science. You can't really do both, honestly. You have to pick a heart.
That is the perfect analogy. Dr. Waleed calls this intellectual polytheism. You are, in effect, worshiping the opinion of a man, your spiritual father, alongside the Word of God. And the Quran is saying that's an invalid state.
So the prohibition on adoption isn't about family law at all. It's a prohibition on what? Sectarianism, blind following.
It's a prohibition on the very existence of a clergy class.
That is a very bold claim. You're saying the Quran is fundamentally anti-clerical.
Based on Dr. Waleed's reading, absolutely. Look at the text. It's all there. Later in this same surah, it says, Muhammad is not the father of any of your men.
We're definitely going to get to that verse, because that feels like, I don't know, the hammer blow to the entire concept of a religious hierarchy.
It is the declaration of independence for the individual believer. It cuts out the middleman.
But before we get there, We absolutely have to talk about where this intellectual revolution is happening, because if you thought redefining Zaid was a shakeup, wait until you hear where Dr. Waleed places this entire story on the map.
A little hint. It's not the Mecca you're thinking of.
It's not Mecca. Okay, hold on. Every map, every history book, every documentary for the last, 1,400 years points to Mecca in modern-day Saudi Arabia. Are you seriously telling me Dr. Waleed thinks the Prophet wasn't in Mecca?
Dr. Waleed is part of a growing movement of critical historical research, but he takes it a step further with his linguistic analysis that argues the descriptions of the central city in the Quran simply do not match the known geography and climate of Mecca.
What doesn't match? Give me an example.
Well, agriculture, for one. The Quran repeatedly talks about 2 gardens, it talks about olives, it talks about grapevines, it addresses a population that are farmers. Mecca, as we know it, is a volcanic, arid valley. Historically, you couldn't farm olives or grapes there. It was a trading outpost, not an agricultural center.
Okay, that's a physical discrepancy. Pretty big one. But where does he think it all happened then?
He argues, based on the text and the context of the Confederates in this very surah, that the mission took place in Baqa al-Quds.
Baqa al-Quds, meaning Baqa, which is Jerusalem.
Yes, Jerusalem. The source material explicitly states that the core mission was centered in the place of pilgrimage that has existed since Adam and Abraham. And that place, he argues, is unequivocally Jerusalem.
Now, why Jerusalem? Aside from the name Baqa, which is also mentioned in the Quran, what is the strategic logic here? Connect us back to Zaid for me.
This is the aha moment in his whole thesis. Remember Zaid?
The Jewish scholar-seeking increase. Our honest academic.
Right. If the Prophet's primary mission was to debate the Abar, the high scholars, the rabbis of the children of Israel, and to convince them that he was the seal of their own prophetic tradition, where would he have to be to do that?
Well, he'd have to be where they are. He can't debate them from a distance. And they weren't hanging out in Mecca.
They were in Jerusalem. Dr. Waleed argues that for the Prophet to debate the high priests, to challenge the sorcerers, his term for the corrupt clerics who mislead the masses, and to win over the Zaids, the honest scholars, he had to be in the religious capital of the world at that time.
That paints a completely different picture of the Prophet's strategy. He wasn't just trying to convert a few pagan tribes in the desert. He was walking into the Vatican of his time to challenge the establishment on its home turf.
Exactly. He was standing in the shadow of the Temple Mount in the city of David and Solomon and Jesus, debating the custodians of the previous scriptures.
That makes the stakes so much higher. This wasn't a local turf war in Arabia. It was a theological takeover of the entire Abrahamic tradition.
It was a battle for the covenant, and that's the name of Dr. Waleed's channel, right? Almighty Covenant. The central struggle is over who holds the authentic covenant of God, the undistorted pure truth. And that struggle, logically, has to happen in the Holy Land.
But if that's true, just playing devil's advocate here, if the Prophet was in Jerusalem debating high-level theology with Jewish scholars, why on earth do we have this deeply entrenched story about Sandy Mecca? Where did that come from?
Dr. Waleed calls it the magic spell again. He argues that the political powers that came later, the enemies of this pure universal truth, deliberately moved the geography.
They moved the map. How do you move a holy city?
They created a dummy site in Mecca to divert the world's attention from the true center of the struggle. They turned the religion into an Arab-centric tribal cult instead of the universal civil religion it was meant to be, centered in Jerusalem. By moving the location, they disconnected Islam from its historical and theological roots in the Israelite tradition.
That is a massive conspiracy theory. We are talking about successfully rewriting history on a global scale for over a millennium.
He would argue it's not a theory, but the only explanation that makes the text make sense. They created a fake history to obscure the real architecture. Think about it. If you believe Islam started in a vacuum in the desert, it's easy to treat it as an alien religion, totally separate from Judaism and Christianity.
But if you realize it started in Jerusalem, as the correction and completion of Judaism and Christianity,
then it's part of the family. It's the final chapter of the same book. And that deeply threatens the people, both then and now, who want to keep the religions separate and fighting each other.
This brings us to another group of people mentioned in Surah Al-Ahzab, the Prophet's wives.
The mothers of the believers.
Okay, if Zaid isn't a man and the geography isn't Mecca, I'm almost afraid to ask this question. Are the wives?
Wives. You are definitely catching on to the methodology. In Dr. Waleed's methodological engineering, the answer is complex. He doesn't deny the Prophet had a physical family, a wife, and daughters. But he argues that in the specific context of these verses, the verses that give public instructions to the wives of the prophet, we're looking at something much, much bigger than domestic advice.
Because again, the same logic applies.
Yeah.
Why would the creator of the universe serve as a marriage counselor in a holy book meant for all time? It just doesn't fit.
Right. Verses like, don't talk too loud, stay home. On the surface, it seems trivial. But if you translate wives azwaj as schools of thought...
Whoa, schools of thought, as in like the different schools of Islamic law.
Exactly. Central methodologies or foundational schools. Think about the honorific title, Mothers of the Believers.
It's a title of the highest respect.
Dr. Waleed asks us to take it literally, but in an intellectual sense. A mother is a source, a matrix, the womb from which something is born. These wives represent the foundational institutions or the core bodies of knowledge that were born directly from the prophetic mission. They are the houses of knowledge.
So when the Quran says, and stay in your houses, it's not saying women don't go outside.
According to this deep dive, absolutely not. It is a divine command to these foundational schools of thought. Stay in your foundational principles. Do not drift. Do not wander off into speculation or foreign ideas. Stick to the core structure, the house that the prophet built for you.
That makes so much more sense as a universal divine command. It's about preserving the integrity of the message across generations.
Precisely. And look at the very next verse, the one on Tabaruj. It says, do not display yourselves like the display of the former times of ignorance. Now, usually, this is interpreted as a dress code for women. Modesty, hijab. Don't wear flashy clothes.
Don't show your beauty to strangers. That's the standard interpretation.
Dr. Waleed completely flips this. He says Tabaruj here refers to intellectual exhibitionism.
Intellectual exhibitionism. I love that phrase. What does it mean in this context?
It means taking the pure, simple truth of the message and decorating it with the gaudy ornaments of the darker, ignorant past, the Jahiliyyah. It's a direct warning to these schools of thought. Don't mix the pure revelation with myths. Don't mix it with pagan folklore. Don't try to make it more sexy or popular by adding philosophical ideas or cultural traditions that don't belong there.
It's a warning against intellectual and spiritual populism.
Yes. Do not display the ignorance of the past within the new, pure structure of truth. Keep the methodology clean. Don't bedazzle the truth with falsehoods.
This connects directly to the concept of al-bayt, doesn't it? The people of the house.
Yes, it flows perfectly into it.
We usually think of this as the prophet's immediate biological family, and it's a huge point of contention. The Shias say it's Ali and Fatima and their sons. The Sunnis include the wives. It's a whole debate that has caused schisms.
And in Dr. Waleed's view, that entire debate is based on a misreading. Al-bayt here refers to the guardians of the sanctuary being Baka, which is Jerusalem, and by extension, the guardians of the covenant, the people entrusted with the message.
And the verse says, God intends to remove the rees from them and purify them.
Exactly. Rees is usually translated as filth or impurity. But here, Dr. Waleed gives it a very specific technical definition. The rees, the filth, is specifically the Israelites, the false narratives, the historical lies, the distortions inserted by the enemies of the truth over centuries.
So purifying the people of the house means purging the guardians of the message from these false historical narratives and corrupted ideas.
Yes. It is God's promise to ensure that the people holding the keys to the religion, the true guardians, are not themselves corrupted by the magic spell of distorted history. It is an intellectual and spiritual purification, not a physical one.
It is so consistent. I mean, every single domestic term we've looked at, son, wife, house, filth, is translated into an intellectual or methodological equivalent.
That is the architecture he talks about. It's a consistent, coherent system. If you read it this way, he argues, all the contradictions and the awkward parts of the traditional story they disappear. You don't have to explain why God is micromanaging the prophet's love life. Instead, you see God orchestrating a massive global ideological revolution.
Let's talk about the leader of that revolution, the prophet himself. We mentioned the title Seal of the Prophets.
The Qadam and Nabiyin.
Dr. Waleed has a very specific take on what that word seal means. It's not just the last one, right? It's not just the period at the end of a long sentence.
Yeah, it's much more active than that. It's about authority. The seal on a royal decree is what validates the document. It makes it official and authenticates everything that came before it. Dr. Waleed synthesizes this with the concept of the thick covenant, the Mythikungaliza, This is referenced in the Quran as being a solemn pact taken from Noah, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad.
The Big Five, the major architects of the divine message.
The Big Five. And Dr. Waleed argues that Muhammad is the seal because his message validates all of them. He confirms the original pure message of Noah, of Abraham, of Moses, of Jesus. He authenticates their missions, and in doing so, he closes the loop.
And in closing the loop, he also closes the door on the idea, the false claimants.
Correct. By sealing the prophetic message, he closes the door on false claimants to spiritual authority. No one else can come along and say, I have a new spiritual lineage, or I'm the next spiritual father. The document is sealed, witnessed, and delivered. The era of new prophets is over.
This brings us to the verse I mentioned earlier, which feels like the climax of this whole argument. Verse 33.4. Muhammad is not the father of any of your men.
This is the hammer blow. It is the verse that dismantles the entire concept of clergy.
Explain that, because on the surface, it just sounds like a simple statement of biological fact. He didn't have any surviving sons who grew to manhood.
But remember the context we've built. We are in the Zaid section. Zaid was his claimed son until the revelation broke that bond. Why did God do that? To prove that the prophet is not a patriarch.
A patriarch in the tribal sense of passing down leadership to his son.
In the tribal sense, and in the religious sense. Throughout human history, religious authority has been passed down like a family inheritance. I am the son of this sheikh, or my father was the high priest, so I am the high priest. I inherited this position. Dr. Waleed says this single verse destroys that entire model. Muhammad is not a godfather. He is not the patriarch of a new tribe. He is the messenger of God.
So the relationship is based on the message, not on blood or loyalty to a person.
And not on spiritual adoption. You cannot say, I am a special holy person because I am connected to the prophet's lineage or because my teacher's teacher was taught by him. No, the prophet is the messenger. You connect to him by connecting to the message he brought. That's the only connection.
This completely destroys the concept of a religious clergy who claim to inherit a special authority from the prophet to control people's minds and lives.
It creates a direct, unmediated relationship between the believer and the text. The source argues there is only one religion, a single, civil, inclusive, comprehensive religion of God. The divisions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam as competing sects, were all man-made pairings. They are the old ideological wives we need to divorce to get to the singular truth.
So if we strip all of that away, if we stop following the idea, the sheiks and priests, and we reorient the geography to Jerusalem, and we see Zaid as the model of the honest seeker, what does that leave us with? What does Dr. Waleed want the person listening today to actually do with this information?
And that's the most important part. This isn't just an academic theory for him. He's calling for a specific type of person to emerge. He creates a profile he calls the learner.
Which fits our listeners perfectly. But what does a learner look like in this new old system?
The first and most crucial step is intellectual independence. Stop looking for a sheikh or a father figure or any expert to tell you what to think. Stop being an adopted son of a particular school of thought or a particular religious leader.
That's terrifying for a lot of people. We like having experts tell us what to do. It feels safer, easier.
It is safer, but he would argue it's spiritually immature. Dr. Waleed argues that the Quran presents itself as a light and a spirit that connects directly to the believer's heart and mind. You don't need an intermediary. You just need to activate your own God-given intellect.
So critical thinking is an act of worship in this model.
It's the highest act of worship. Analyze the sources of your beliefs. Ask yourself the hard questions. Am I following a Zaid? That is, am I being a genuine seeker of truth who is willing to leave behind old, comfortable ideas when I find better ones? Or am I blindly following an idol, an idea?
The new Zaid.
Exactly. The listener is invited to become a Zaid, to be someone who uses their will and their intellect to leave behind comfortable ignorance and marry the active, lifelong pursuit of truth.
It's a call to bravery, really. Because leaving your methodology, your inherited tradition, your old way of thinking is painful. It can feel like a real divorce. You lose your community, your identity.
It is. That's why the metaphor of divorce is so powerful in the Sirah. It acknowledges the immense difficulty. It's hard to leave the traditions of your fathers. It's terrifying to say, what I was taught in Sunday school or at the mosque or by my parents might actually be a distortion. But the promise is that if you do, God marries you to something infinitely better.
To truth itself.
To truth itself.
Okay, we have covered a massive amount of ground here. We've moved from what seemed like a domestic drama in the desert to a cosmic intellectual revolution centered in Jerusalem.
It is a lot to process, I know.
Let's try to recap Dr. Khaled Waleed's thesis one more time before we wrap up,
Okay.
just so we have the architecture clear in our own heads.
Of course. Let's break it down into the 4 main pillars of this rereading. First, Zaid is not a person, but a profile, the seeker, who courageously outgrows old, barren methodologies.
Okay. Pillar 2.
Second, the wives of the prophet in this context are not just women, but the foundational methodologies and schools of thought that must remain pure and free from intellectual exhibitionism.
Pillar 3.
Third, the prophet is the seal of the one, continuous covenant, and his mission was centered in Bakka, which is Jerusalem, the historical center of that covenant, not the Mecca of Arabia.
And finally, the goal for us.
And fourth, the goal for the reader today is to break the magic spell of distorted history, to see past the Israelites and false biographies, to perceive the true architecture of thought that liberates the human mind.
And the ultimate goal of that liberation is what?
Liberation from the clergy, liberation from blind following, liberation from ignorance, true intellectual and spiritual freedom.
Now, Dr. Waleed leaves us with the final provocative thought in the source material. And this one is, well, it's heavy. It connects everything we've talked about for the last hour to the headlines on the 6 o'clock news.
It absolutely connects the ancient theology to the present-day conflict.
He mentions that the enemies of the truth are those who actively hide the geographical and methodological truth we've been discussing.
Right. And he poses a question. If the geography of the prophetic mission was indeed Jerusalem Bakka, and if the struggle was always about who holds the covenant in the Holy Land, how does that radically change our understanding of the struggle we see happening there today?
If Islam isn't an outsider religion from Arabia that came to conquer Jerusalem, but is in fact the seal of the original Jerusalem tradition,
then the claim to the land and the entire nature of the conflict shifts dramatically. It's no longer a clash of civilizations between foreign entities. It becomes a clash within the covenant itself. It's a tragic family feud over the authentic legacy of Abraham being fought on the very ground where the Zaids and the prophet once stood.
that is a thought that will keep me up tonight.
It should keep all of us up.
And he leaves us with a personal question, too, a question for every single listener.
He asks, are you carrying 2 hearts in your chest?
One for the truth you feel in your gut.
And one for the traditions you're afraid to question.
That is the question we are going to leave you with today. Are you ready to be a Zaid?
It's a journey worth taking.
If you want to go straight to the source, and we highly, highly recommend you do because we've only just scratched the surface, check out Dr. Khaled Waleed's channel. It's called Almighty Covenant, Aloha Said.
The linguistic work he does there is, it's profound. You have to see it for yourself.
Thanks for diving deep with us. Keep seeking, keep increasing. We'll see you next time.